Imagine sitting in a quiet bedroom in the Lakewood neighborhood of Jacksonville, Florida. It is November 9, 1998. For 6 days, the city has been holding its breath, searching for an 8-year-old girl who vanished into thin air. You are a patrol sergeant named Tom Hackney, and you are conducting a routine follow-up interview with a 14-year-old neighbor. The boy, Joshua Phillips, is sitting on his bed. He isn't trembling. He isn't sweating. He is calmly, rhythmically petting his dog. Hackney would later describe the teenager as cool as a cucumber, completely unaffected by the presence of law enforcement in his private space. But there is a detail the sergeant doesn't know, a detail so catastrophic it would haunt him for the next 3 decades. As the boy sits there, stroking his beagle's fur and answering questions with suburban poise, the body of the little girl the entire world is looking for is hidden just inches away. She is entombed inside the wooden base of the very waterbed Joshua is sitting on. This is a story where appearance and reality were constantly at war, and where a neighborhood built on trust was used to mask a nightmare that no one saw coming. To understand how such a dark truth could hide behind the face of a pretty decent kid, we have to go back to the world as it was before the silence took over, a world where the boundaries between yards were invisible and the sound of laughter was a constant. In the late 90s, Lakewood was the kind of community where parents didn't worry about their children playing between houses without supervision. At the heart of that joy was 8-year-old Madeline Ray Clifton, known to everyone simply as Giggles. Maddie was a vibrant child, a talented piano player, and a tomboy who loved pickup basketball and hitting golf balls in her driveway. Her older sister, Jessie, remembers Maddie as having a deep, natural empathy that was rare for her age. She would watch television and find herself rooting for the scary people or the monsters because she couldn't stand the thought of anyone being lonely or isolated. This massive heart for the underdog is likely why she spent so much time across the street with her 14-year-old neighbor, an awkward boy who seemed to share her love for animals. Joshua Phillips appeared to the outside world as an unremarkable teenager. His teachers called him popular, fun, and silly, and he maintained a C average in school. To Maddie's parents, Steve and Sheila Clifton, he was the safest person in the world for their daughter to be around. A home video from a year before the tragedy shows the two sisters playing happily with Joshua and his dog in his front yard. However, behind the closed doors of the Phillips household, a much different and more volatile reality was unfolding. Joshua's father, Steve Phillips, was an alcoholic and drug addict with a history of domestic violence against both Joshua and his mother, Melissa. Joshua lived under a set of strict, fearful rules. He was never allowed to have friends over when his parents weren't home, and his father had a particular, unexplained dislike for young girls. Defense experts would later argue that this environment created a state of pervasive fear in the boy, leaving him constantly walking on eggshells to avoid triggering his father's rage. This contrast was the invisible fuse waiting to be lit. On one side of the street was a family enjoying fantastic memories of a happy life. On the other was a boy being taught that secrets and fear were the only tools for survival. The normalcy of life in Lakewood shattered on the afternoon of November 3, 1998. It was election day. Maddie came home from school, practiced her piano, and then vaulted out of the house around 4:30 p.m. to play. She was last seen alive in her driveway, with a neighbor's grandmother observing Joshua creeping up on her, a detail that in hindsight suggested a predatory approach rather than the accidental interaction the boy would later describe. When Maddie didn't show up for the family dinner at 6:30 p.m., her father, Steve, described the feeling as if she had simply shut the door and just, poof, vanished off the face of the earth. Within hours, the neighborhood was transformed into a command center for a massive mobilization. Thousands of volunteers handed out flyers featuring Maddie's freckled-dotted face and cool aid smile. The search was so intense that the National Guard was called in to wade through dark, cramped sewer systems to ensure she wasn't trapped beneath the city streets. But as the search grew more desperate, the most chilling contradiction of the entire case was taking place right in front of the cameras. Joshua Phillips wasn't hiding. He was helping. For a week, he walked the streets of Lakewood alongside Maddie's grieving parents, looking investigators in the eye with a mask of helpful innocence. He later claimed he was living in a fantasy world, a psychological defense mechanism, where he simply convinced himself that the crime hadn't happened at all. This wall of denial was so thick that for 7 nights, while the community searched frantically through the woods, Joshua went into his bedroom and slept peacefully on top of his waterbed, the very structure that served as a makeshift tomb for his friend. But while he maintained his internal fantasy, the physical world was beginning to betray him. But something didn't make sense. As the days passed, a strange, pervasive odor began to fill the Phillips home. Joshua's mother, Melissa, noticed the smell first. She also noticed a mysterious wet spot on the floor at the foot of her son's bed. For a week, she thought it was just a leak. But on the morning of November 10, her curiosity finally overcame her. She pulled apart the wooden baseboard of the bed to check for the source of the water. What she saw was a nightmare. 2 small feet, wearing white socks, were sticking out from beneath the frame. Melissa ran from the house in a state of total shock, flagging down a police officer outside and leading him to the room, unable to even step back inside herself as the horrific truth was revealed. Maddie Clifton had been found, and the investigation into how she got there would systematically dismantle every lie Joshua had told. When the boy was brought in for questioning later that day, he told a story of an accident that spiraled out of control. He claimed he and Maddie were playing baseball in his backyard when he accidentally hit her in the eye with a ball. He said he panicked, afraid of what his abusive father would do if he found her in the house. To stop her from crying, he said he dragged her inside, hit her with a baseball bat, and shoved her under his bed. But what investigators found next changed everything. The forensic evidence systematically dismantled his story. The autopsy revealed that Maddie's death was not a single moment of panic, but rather 3 distinct phases of calculated violence. In the first phase, she was struck at least 3 times on her forehead with the bat, receiving wounds that would have been fatal within 30 minutes if left untreated. Instead of seeking help, Joshua moved to the second phase. He used a knife from a Leatherman tool to slit her throat, perforating her windpipe and causing her to drown in her own blood. Most hauntingly, the medical examiner found that Maddie's hand was still clutching a metal bracket on the waterbed frame, proving she was still alive and fighting for her life when she was first shoved underneath. The final phase occurred after Joshua's father had already returned home. Realizing that Maddie was still moaning loudly enough to be heard through the walls, Joshua pulled her out and stabbed her in the chest and abdomen at least 9 times to ensure she finally stopped breathing. Prosecutors also noted that there was no blood found in the backyard and no dirt on her body, proving she was never hit or dragged outside as Joshua claimed. It wasn't an accident. It was a cold, calculated effort to silence a friend. The legal fallout of these mechanics was swift. In 1999, Joshua was tried as an adult and convicted of first-degree murder in a trial that lasted only 2 days. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the harshest sentence available for a juvenile at the time. For nearly 2 decades, that seemed to be the final chapter for a city that would never forget the girl with the cool aid smile. However, the definition of justice is often as fluid as the laws that govern it. In 2012, a landmark Supreme Court ruling in Miller v. Alabama changed the landscape, stating that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional because children have a greater potential for reform. This legal shift brought Joshua Phillips back into a Duval County courtroom in 2017. Now a man in his 30s, he looked nothing like the teenager who had hidden a secret under his bed. The prosecution admitted he had been a model prisoner, serving as a law clerk and tutor for other inmates. He addressed the Clifton family directly, stating, "I did something horrible. I'm so sorry." But for the Cliftons, time had not brought a desire for mercy. Maddie's sister, Jessie, who had lost her best friend and her own identity that week in 1998, stood firm against his release. She reminded the court that while Joshua was asking for a second chance, Maddie never got one. Her mother, Sheila, was equally adamant. Maddie's sentence was final. Her killer should be too. Despite his rehabilitation, the judge again sentenced him to life, but under the new law, he was entitled to a formal review after 25 years. As we move through 2025 and into 2026, that moment of ultimate decision has finally arrived. Joshua Phillips is now 41 years old and is currently back in the Duval County Jail, awaiting the hearing that will determine if he should be granted a meaningful opportunity for release. His defense team points to his decades of maturity, while the city of Jacksonville finds itself revisiting a trauma it thought was buried. A key hearing is scheduled for December 16, 2025, to set the final date for this evidentiary review. This ongoing battle leaves us with a haunting question that the law continues to struggle with. How do we measure redemption against a horror that can never be undone? Is 25 years enough to pay for a life that was just beginning? While the court will weigh these factors in 2026, the emotional reality for those involved is far more complex than any legal statute. The most powerful image of this entire tragedy isn't found in a courtroom, but in the Lakewood neighborhood itself. Today, Jessie Clifton has moved back into the childhood home where she and Maddie once played. She is in the process of buying it, refusing to let the act of violence across the street define her family's legacy. As Jessie walks the halls of that home, she says it remains filled with fantastic memories of the years before 1998. The memory of the girl with the Kool-Aid smile remains the center of her world, a quiet and beautiful light that continues to shine long after a neighbor tried to hide it away. Justice may be fluid and the law may change, but for the family left behind, some sentences truly are final. As the courts in 2026 weigh the complex mechanics of juvenile rehabilitation, the Lakewood neighborhood remains frozen in a different kind of math. For the Clifton family, time is not measured in sentencing reviews. It is measured in the family dinners where one seat remains permanently empty. Maddie never got her second chance. She never graduated, never fell in love, never started a family of her own. Jessie Clifton, once the sister who lost her best friend, has now returned to the childhood home where the nightmare began. She is reclaiming the halls where giggles once played. She is surrounding herself with fantastic memories from the years before the silence took over. But as the legal system grapples with the possibility of redemption for a man who has spent 2/3 of his life behind bars, a single haunting image remains from the forensic files. The small hand of an 8-year-old girl clutching a metal bracket beneath a waterbed frame. It is a chilling reminder of a final, desperate struggle for a life that was being stolen just inches away from a neighbor who sat cool as a cucumber, petting his dog. The case of Joshua Phillips serves as a permanent warning of how easily deception can hide behind the face of a pretty decent kid. While laws may evolve and prisons may reform, some sentences are simply final. The most devastating secrets are often buried in plain sight, just beneath the surface of a normal life.